Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to the fifth session of Food for Thought. We hope you've enjoyed the course so far. Today we'll look at climate change in relation to food production, and Edward Meleki, based in Malawi, will lead the session. Edward is the Global Climate Change, Agroforestry and Natural Resource Management Advisor at Self-Help Africa. This week you'll learn about the climate emergency and the impact on countries in Africa, the challenge of climate change and food production globally, Self-Help Africa's work in the area of climate-smart agriculture, as well as other methods of reducing emissions, and what the future of food production could look like. Enjoy the session, and if you're interested in learning more about climate change and food production, we've shared links to further reading materials as usual. Next week, we'll be sharing our sixth and final session of this online course. We'll see you then.
My name is Edward Meleki. I'm the Global Climate Change, Agroforestry and Natural Resource Management Advisor for Self-Help Africa. I'll be talking through this session on climate change and food production workshop. All right, so today's Food for Thought online course, we will be talking about climate change and food production on our week 5 series. The World Health Organization in 2019 gave us a report that about 56 million people died in that year, out of which 13.6 million people died because of environmental related issues. And really, this is quite a high number that we see people dying because of climate change. And people might ask what is really causing these environmental related deaths. Basically, it's a frequent extreme weather events that has led to us losing a lot of people dying across the globe. Especially, people are faced with issues to do with coldness, heat waves, droughts. Yeah, you find that because of heat, people who fail to contend with it, they will die. Sometimes we have seen a lot of bushfires, coming out, starting in forest areas, and we have seen serious fires burning down, property, and people's lives have been lost. We have seen people dying of pneumonia because it's too cold, especially children who die. And we have seen floods killing people. Recently, we are struggling with zoonotic disease like COVID-19. These diseases are coming up because of changes in the climate parameters. Waterborne diseases also have really increased. And also mental health issues have come out because people are really don't know what to do when stricken with a disaster like a storm, floods, and the like. So people are stressed a lot, and as a result, they suffer from mental health issues. So all these things, they are causing deaths, and these are serious things that we need to look out for. And probably all of us are at threat. We can die if we are not very careful because of these issues. So basically, environmental related deaths, if we don't act, they will be here to stay, and it will take a long time, for us to contend them. So we need to act now, and by acting now, we need to ensure that we reduce on the emissions, carbon emissions that we produce. This could be at household level, but also at all other levels where carbon is being produced. We should look at ways of addressing that problem of carbon emissions, but also because the effects of climate change are already here with us, we should be able to find the means and ways, to mitigate against the adverse effects of climate change, which we are currently facing. But also we need to look at how do we make people adapt to these things, these issues. How do we make people adapt to droughts, for example? How do we make people adapt to floods, storms, and the like, if at all they are able to adapt to such circumstances? So those are some of the issues that we need to act upon and make sure we address them. A few weeks ago, within November, we saw the world leaders coming together, to address some of these issues. We had the COP26 UN Climate Change Conference, and top of the agenda was, issues to do with climate change. For 2 weeks, people were discussing how do we address these matters, what should we do. Everyone was talking. Everyone was giving their point of view and also the way forward and what they thought is right to do. But unfortunately, there was no consensus in all these discussions. And we saw, countries pledging to reduce on the usage of coal, but not necessarily doing away with it. And other countries were quite skeptical to completely do away with the use of coal. We also saw countries, agreeing to reducing methane emissions. So all those discussions, of course, we didn't see quite serious consensus on it, and it's dependent on a specific country and their commitments, towards addressing these climate change issues. And you agree with me that each country probably they were making those commitments, but they didn't say whether they have the framework and mechanism to monitor their commitments over time. The COP26 conference gave us the alarm, and gave us the need for us to recognize that there is a serious concern here. And that we need to make serious, decisions for us to keep, global warming within acceptable levels. Of course, we have already, caused the 1.1 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures, and people are concerned globally to say what will happen if this temperature increased it to a level beyond 1.5 degrees. Like the most emitters, like the countries that produce more pollutants, people who have really contributed to the rise in global temperatures through emissions of carbon and other, global, other gases that, affect the climate parameters, which cause global warming, like methane and other gases. These countries are mostly developed, in nature. They have the facilities, around them. They have good medical health facilities. The countries that have got, the economies that are performing better. But you agree with me that, global environmental issues affects all of us, even if you are staying in a poor country or a rich country. These problems related to climate change will find you wherever you are. Africa, for example, we here in Africa, people have not really developed their nations, but they don't have facilities also to help them withstand, the climate change effects, and they are quite relying, on the rich countries to support them. You find that people living in Africa are amongst those that are least responsible for climate change. African countries probably have not contributed that much, in terms of percentage contribution of carbon. carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. We have countries that are developed that have really emitted previously serious emissions, and that over a period of time has led to quite a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other gases that greenhouse gases that have been emitted in the atmosphere. So people living in Africa, least contribution, but they are getting the worst effects, you know. And Africa, being a continent depending on agriculture, and its economy is really at stake, because if there are any variations in temperatures, in rainfall amounts in a particular year, then there are problems of food shortage, you know, because of poor harvests, and also hunger looming in communities. But also, you know, the country economies, they get affected, you know, by that. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm Edward Meleki. I'm the Global Climate Change and Agroforestry and Natural Resource Advisor for Self-Help Africa. Currently, I'm based in Malawi, but I'm supporting other 13 countries that where Self-Help Africa is currently working. I developed interest in the environment when I was very young, living with my family in the village in Central Province, Zambia. That's where I come from. And growing up in the rural area, and we really used to depend on you know, non-timber forest products for our fruits, mushrooms, and other foodstuffs. Also, we really used to, you know, even hunt for birds in the wild, you know, in the forest, in the bush. So I really loved trees at that time, and I decided also to do a course in forestry, and at some point I also did a course in environmental education. But again, I went back to do a course in tropical forestry. So I will be graduating next year with my master's in tropical forestry. You probably all know that the global population, you know, has been projected to increase over the coming years. For example, at the moment, we are around 7.8 billion people globally. And when you look back in 1951, you know, the global population was around 2.5 billion, you know, people. But probably in 2071, we might be even over 10.5 billion on Earth. Just people, and all these people, you know, they want to eat something every day, you know, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evenings. And whenever they are feeling hungry, you know, people will eat. But we are faced with a situation here where climate parameters have changed and are still changing, but also we need also to produce food in the presence of these changes in climate parameters. Temperatures are increasing and rainfall patterns have changed, but people still need to produce food. So we are already seeing a deficit in food, probably in other countries where people don't have food to eat. But in other countries, they have even more than enough to eat. So when we are talking about climate and food, we need to look at how does climate affect food production, but also how does food production also affect, you know, climate parameters. Food production is a major producer of harmful greenhouse gases. We all know that agriculture is the biggest problem when it comes to emissions of greenhouse gases. Livestock production, crop production, all those things that we do for us to have food. They will emit greenhouse gases like methane, and carbon dioxide, and the like. But also climate change has a huge impact and effects on food production. If rainfall patterns change, if there's a drought, people will fail to produce food. But also if there are floods, you'll find that people's fields are washed away and there's no food in that year. People struggle and the like. Increased temperatures might also bring in other issues like increase in crop diseases, animal diseases, but also other pests, who multiply if the environment or temperature becomes favorable. So those are some of the issues that we are being faced with currently in agriculture food production. But now, how are we going to produce food? With these changing in climate parameters, how are we to produce food? How should the farmer, grow and produce food? So climate change and food production is very challenging. It's very challenging, especially for the poor people. They don't have resources. Access to seed is a problem. Access to money is a problem. And it's difficult for them to grow crops. Probably they don't even have technology, to use when growing food. They need to be taught how to adapt to some of these things. Farming itself, often, like I indicated before, is a significant generator of greenhouse gases. But also, we need to also understand that people should also produce food to eat. So even if it's emitting greenhouse gases, people are continuously requiring food to eat. So there should be a way of producing food with reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Livestock, for example, is said to contribute 2/3 of agriculture greenhouse gases, which is in form of methane emissions, which is quite high. But also global food losses and food waste also contribute about 8%. So you see all these issues needs to be looked at, addressed. Issues to do with livestock, farming, and also food waste. We need to look at these things so that we minimize emissions and address emissions before they can happen. Talking of emissions from forest degradation also is quite huge at the moment. We are losing a lot of forests across the globe. 10 to 11% of greenhouse gases are coming from the emissions as a result of deforestation, clearing land, for agriculture, cut trees in a forest area, conversion of gazetted forest into settlements, opening up new land for agriculture. All those activities, they lead to, increase the emissions of greenhouse gases. So we need to ensure that probably we look at the manner in which we are opening up land, clearing trees, for agriculture, so that we could minimize the emissions, from agriculture activities. The outlook for the future, how does it look in terms of climate change? Research has also shown that production of fruits and vegetables might reduce by 2050 due to issues to do with climate change. There'll be those reductions even in the consumption of red meat. But also we'll find that in the future we'll have increase in nutrient deficiencies in people and these deficiencies could lead to death. So we will be probably likely to see a lot of deaths related to nutrient deficiencies because people are not eating enough vegetables, enough fruits, enough meat, and the like. So those are some of the future things that we need to be concerned about and probably address as we move along. Irish Aid Focus amplifies concerns of those most vulnerable, to climate change. They advocate for greater allocation of funding for grassroots adaptation. But also, Ireland is an active participant in the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change. And they consider, climate change a serious issue, and they would really love to address, climate change, effects for especially the poor people, the vulnerable people. Gender equality is very important, and governance, in other countries is quite poor, but it needs to be strengthened. So Irish Aid support is very key in this area. For us to address climate change issues, we need, good governance, and governance that is strengthened for countries to address issues to do with climate change. And humanitarian need is very, very important. We need to address that because we have seen that a lot of people will need food assistance, but we can only reduce that by supporting communities so that they can produce more food, but in a climate, a smart way, so that they don't pollute, the environment. As South Africa, our work focus on both, to reduce carbon emissions, but also helping communities, in vulnerable locations, to adapt and mitigate against the effects of climate change. We do so by supporting farmers to grow diverse crops, and in some cases, alternative crops, crops that are resilient to climate change, like millet, cassava, and other crops that can adapt to increased, temperatures, but also for areas where flood is a problem during the main rain season or the main farming season. We also encourage, farmers to grow crops off season. These could be irrigated crops within their farming, communities. So we support smallholder farmers with these options so that they produce enough food to eat. How do we encourage farmers to grow crops? Normally, we employ the climate smart agriculture technologies, for us to allow farmers to grow, to encourage farmers to grow enough food, for their home consumption. We use, technologies such as conservation agriculture and also agroforestry. So under conservation agriculture, we promote, minimal tillage, where we encourage farmers, to only disturb where they want to plant the seed to avoid, a maximum tillage, which releases a lot of carbon. When you turn upside down your soil, you are exposing your soil, to a lot of heat, and the soil carbon will start getting released, from the organic matter in the soil. Farmers are encouraged to leave the crop residues lying on the floor of their fields. So this helps in cooling the ground, but also moisture retention in the soil in case of droughts and stuff. We also encourage farmers to rotate their crops, which is very important. Crop rotation, also enhances soil fertility, but also it helps, minimize crop diseases and pests in crop fields. So rotation is very important for farmers to adopt when they are growing their crops. They can rotate these crops annually, or every season they want to grow crops, they could grow a different crop on the same piece of land. We also encourage crop diversification so that farmers can grow an array of crops to minimize the risk of crop failure, but also to diversify household diets so that a household can have quite a lot of foods that they have grown and also consume all the seeds, the foods that they have produced. So this also plays very well for nutrition at household level, but also in communities. We also encourage, farmers to use manure and other compost, fertilizers, organic fertilizers in their crop production, so that they can add more, carbon into the soil. If they apply manure, they are also adding a lot of carbon in the soil. South Africa, we are also planting trees, encouraging farmers to plant trees in farming landscapes. We all know that degraded land, bare land, can only be reclaimed if we plant trees. For us to, even bring back nutrients in the soil, also to protect the soil against too much heat. We need to have, open land, bare land covered by trees. And we also know that trees can also help in sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So South Africa, we have been planting trees, and we will continue planting trees in farming landscapes. It's very important for, biodiversity, diversification in farming landscapes, but also it's very important for nutrition at household level. I'll take you through this, this extract from one of the research papers, where researchers looked at the benefits of trees in farming landscapes. You are seeing from this graph, this table, this figure, that land which is totally bare, you see that there is a lot of, surface runoff. When it rains, a lot of topsoil is taken away by surface runoff, but also there's a lot of soil evaporation. A lot of water is lost because there's no cover whatsoever. And the infiltration of water into the soil becomes a problem. So even the amount of water underground, is quite a problem when you look at the open space, the degraded part. But we are seeing, quite a lot of improvement in the intermediate section, where we are seeing trees in farming landscapes. You find that there's better, water infiltration rates if we have got, scattered trees in farming landscapes. We also see that, soil evaporation, water evaporation from the soil is quite reduced compared to the farming landscape that have no trees. We also see that transpiration and interception is not very big in farming landscapes that have trees. And if you compare that to forest areas where there's maximum canopy closure, where there are a lot of trees, you see that groundwater recharge is a problem if there's a lot of trees, but also infiltration into the soil is very good. You'll see that water will drain into the soil properly without increase the runoff at a very good rate. So water infiltration is good, but underground water recharge becomes a problem because most of water is lost as it evaporates back into the atmosphere to also create another rain cycle. So those are some of the issues that you see in different landscapes. And we, as Self-Help Africa, encourage planting of trees in farming landscapes so that we can improve on, so water, availability and also infiltration rate, so that people can have even water to drink from underground and stuff. So you see all these things we promote for us to also enhance that the biodiversity levels in farming landscapes, but also enhance, the availability of food, because we also promote planting of fruits like mangoes, macadamia, and other fruits in farming landscapes. We are also promoting fuel efficient cook stoves. You can see in the picture there, a lady, cooking using a fuel efficient stove. So that stove only allows a very small wood to be pushed in, to provide the cooking energy for whatever the household needs to cook. It's very good compared to the traditional way of cooking, where we use the 3-stone, stove in the rural communities, which consumes a lot of wood. But this one can also use twigs, tree twigs, very small branches from a tree. You cut them, then you prepare your meal, and it uses very less energy, but also produces little smoke. So it's very good for the household to use. We are promoting these types of cooking stoves in rural communities, but also we are providing clean water, digging boreholes for communities. So if a community is drawing water from an open source, a river or a lake or a stream, a shallow well, they need to boil that water, for them to make it safe for drinking. So if we drill a borehole, and put some pipes to pull it from the underground through a pump or something, you'll find that that water will be safe for drinking, because it's coming from a protected water point, and the communities will not be boiling, water, for them to drink. So if they stop boiling water for drinking, because they are getting it from a protected water point, a good quality and safe drinking water, we are conserving, we are saving on trees. People will be using less trees, less fuel wood to boil water for their drinking. So these are some of the ways that we are using, to reduce carbon emissions at community level. So global food systems, where are we going? Where to? Those are some of the questions people might ask in the face of climate change. So globally, we'll have enough food by 2030. Research has shown that there'll be enough food, but hundreds of millions of people will remain hungry. Like previously, you saw where I was talking about food shortages in 93 countries. Yeah, so we have about 195 countries, if not mistaken, in the world today. Out of 195 countries, 93 countries don't have, people in there don't have enough to eat, which means the other remaining, 102 countries, they have food to eat. Probably other countries have more than enough food to eat. So global food systems, they are not meeting the needs of the world's population. And the natural resource base in poorer countries, you'll find that the natural resource base is depleted, completely gone. You look at the forests where they used to extract non-timber products, forest products, you'll find that most of the forests are depleted, encroached, and they have lost, biodiversity, and communities cannot go in there. to harvest any of the foods that they were getting. But also you find that droughts, floods have affected most of the farming, communities in poor countries, and they are failing, to produce enough food to feed their families. Yeah, so those are some of the issues that needs to be looked at and see how best now do we address the global food system for people to have access to food and at least eat something in a day. It's quite disheartening seeing communities, sleeping without eating anything, while other countries are food to eat and probably throwing food in bins and dump sites. So we need to adopt improved technologies, and also plant more trees and allow trees to grow in degraded forest areas so that we address some of these concerns around food availability and food production in the future. If we cannot, adopt improved technologies and plant and grow trees, we might face a very fragile future, and food will become really a problem for the countries that are already struggling to meet their food demands. And we'll see a lot of people dying because of lack of food, but not only food, but also the quality, of food that is being eaten is a problem sometimes in these poor countries. People eating maybe only carbohydrates, every day in and day out, and they are missing out on other nutrients that they need to eat, which becomes a problem. So we need to produce food, yes, but we should produce food using technologies that reduce carbon emissions. We should also rethink food production systems. We should move away from the business as usual and also encourage farmers, to adopt technologies that produce food that don't pollute a lot, the environment. We need to rethink food production systems globally. How do we produce food? Because we have seen communities that produce food without following any climate smart, agriculture technologies. They are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, but I think they need to relook at their systems and produce food in a climate smart way so that our environment is saved from effects or adverse effects of climate change. We need to try and enhance, biodiversity in farming landscapes, especially in countries and communities where farming landscapes have no biodiversity, no trees whatsoever. You can't even see any animal, in the community because there are no, trees where these animals could hide or stay. So we need to try and encourage farmers in the farming communities at least to plant some trees. We see that people have incorporated trees, which would attract biodiversity. You start seeing birds coming to your farms. They'll be singing beautiful songs in your farms, which is good to see. And other, animals will start appearing in your farms. So it is always good to enhance biodiversity in farming landscapes so that we can have enhanced the food availability, but also improve the nutrition at household level. We also need to relook at the food distribution systems, local trade in food, but also international trade, where we see countries with a lot of food, but other countries have no food at all. So I think this is something that needs to be looked at, addressed. If at all international trade in food is becoming a problem, and we are seeing countries, some countries, people dying for lack of food, when other countries have a lot of food. I think it's a system that we can address as a people on one planet, on one earth, so that everyone else should have enough food to eat. Food can be produced anywhere, but I think government should be able to see that it's the people in those countries, especially affected by climate change, should also have access to food. Lastly, I think we should also change our consumption behavior, and we should also ensure that we educate sensitized communities, on food consumption, so that maybe they consume food in the right way, but also improve people's behavior towards food consumption. Yeah, so we all need food. We all need something to eat every day. And if you have eaten, you should thank a farmer, because a farmer somewhere else produced that food. But we should also encourage farmers to produce food using sustainable ways, so that we don't damage our environment because of greenhouse gas emissions that we are putting out there in the atmosphere for the sole reason of producing food for everyone to eat. So this was my presentation to you today on the Food for Thought online course. I'll end here for now. I hope to see you soon in future. Bye-bye.